If you thought I was going to do some routine about, oh, did you like it? Is he going to talk shit about this movie? Did he hate it as much as First Flight? Then you'll be sorely disappointed. The Dark Knight Returns is still the best DC animated original movie out there. An aging Bruce Wayne has given up being the Batman. In fact, all superheroes other than Superman have vacated Earth or retired, and Superman is working directly for the American government. Bruce took this bitterly, and his 10-year retirement has been met with turbulence every step of the way. With crime once again rampant in Gotham, with Commissioner Gordon being all but forced into retirement himself, and after 10 years of stooling around looking for anything to get his blood flowing and to keep the nightmares away, Bruce seems to be seeking to die a spectacular death. But, after a fateful night with particularly potent memories awakened, Bruce finally snaps. He takes to Gotham, once again donning the cape and cowl, going to work combating the new gang known as the Mutants, who are of a more chaotic breed than the common crook. A thief wanted money. The Mutants wanted to blow off steam and would do anything to get that fix. Harvey Dent, meanwhile, has his damaged face repaired, but after having spent decades with his disorder, Two-Face reemerges, and it's up to Batman to stop him. Two-Face is defeated in an utterly tragic manner, believing not that the doctors had fixed his scarred half, but ruined his good half. But at least both sides matched either way. The conflict with the mutants comes to a head. After a crippling defeat at the hands of the mutant leader, Batman is saved by the timely arrival of a young Carrie Kelly, whom he adopts as his new Robin. Learning from his defeat, he orchestrates another battle with the leader in front of his entire army, where he utterly humiliates him and inspires, though radically, for the mutants to change their tune and start helping the world instead of causing destruction.
You finished, old man! You don't get it, son. This isn't a mud hole. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon.
While some refuse to change and are locked up, those that do split off into smaller gangs, one naming themselves the Sons of Batman, and vowing to help the people by combating criminals instead of the common folk. 3 months later, crime is at a low, though at the same time, Joker has begun to stir. After Batman's show of dethroning the mutant leader, the once comatose supervillain is reinvigorated. His psychiatrist makes a fatal error and gets Joker onto a talk show as a publicity stunt, which results in the deaths of hundreds, and with Gordon retired and his successor hunting for Batman, Bruce is unable to save the people in time. The conflict ends up at a local fair, where Batman and the Joker have a final showdown deep within the tunnel of love. They eat at each other, both breaking down piece by piece until finally, Batman snaps. He partially breaks Joker's neck, crippling him. Knowing that he finally made Batman lose control, even for a split second, and knowing that the police will blame Batman for his death anyway, Joker finishes the job, killing himself and framing Batman as a murderer. At the same time, Batman's vigilantism has drawn the attention of the American government. Superman is sent to warn Bruce that if he doesn't stop, that Clark will be made to stop him. Bruce accepts the challenge, though Clark is then sent away to deal with the growing Cold War tensions, which ultimately culminates in a nuclear blast. Superman thankfully keeps it from going off on the ground, but it does severely weaken him as he's caught in its nucleus. As well, the blast completely knocks out the electricity in the United States, sending the country into chaos. It's only through the efforts of Batman does the city rally together to bring peace to Gotham, and in the end, Gotham turns out to be the only city left standing unscathed from the riots and looting. Finally, the government has had enough of Batman humiliating them and their attempts at order. Superman is sent in, only partially recovered from the nuclear blast. And meanwhile, Batman has tools, he has allies, and he has dozens of contingencies, all of which are used against the Man of Steel. Missiles launch detecting his use of X-ray vision. The Batmobile, in this version more of a tank than anything, hits him with everything it has. Bruce electrocutes Superman with the equivalent of the entire city's power. He dons a power suit, which allows him to compare to the Kryptonian physically. And finally, he's able to hit him with a burst of kryptonite, made over decades for this very eventuality. Superman is defeated, though Bruce seemingly dies of a heart attack immediately after. At the same time, Alfred detonates Wayne Manor, and all traces of the Batman are laid to rest. At the funeral, however, Superman hears the beating of a heart, and though he knows now that Bruce is still alive, he simply smiles to Robin, and continues on his way. Underground, Bruce is alive and well, having taken a pill to cause the fake heart attack, and is set to work training the reformed mutants as his own private Bat Army, having finally found a fulfilling way to die. Where do I start with this movie? Like, really, where do I start? I suppose the source material is as good a place as any. The Dark Knight Returns was written by Frank Miller and released in 1986, and is considered one of, if not the most, influential DC comic book ever written, perhaps second only to Watchmen. I have not read it. I have seen panels of it, and it looks very well done, but this critique is going to be solely focused on the two-part film adaptation. With that established, I'll say that it's one of the best comic book adaptations ever. Unlike with Miller's other adaptation, Batman Year One, this film is given the time it needs to adapt the story to its fullest extent. At a full 2.5 hours of runtime, released separately in 2 parts, Dark Knight Returns features 4 distinct story arcs with their own climaxes. Two-Face and the Mutants in Part 1, and the Joker and Superman in Part 2. But though the latter does have the usual drop in tension after the first story ends, as you might expect, the first part does not. In general, I prefer Part 1 to Part 2, and that's all down to pacing. I don't think I've seen a more well-paced 2D animated movie than this one. Each scene feels important, is engaging, and as the movie goes on, each serves to make you more attached and engrossed with this depressing world that Frank Miller made. If you're looking for the traditional Batman, you're not going to get it. We see the brutality that he engages in to combat these new opponents, and he isn't afraid to knock some heads or use questionable methods to achieve his ends, such as using a variant of Scarecrow's fear toxin to subdue a group of Two-Face's henchmen who are guarding a bomb. Unlike some other films we've watched, however, this seemed like a deliberate choice, and the filmmakers had enough tact to point out to us what happened, and specifically that Batman did it. But don't worry, there's still plenty of humanity left in Mr. Bruce Wayne. Time is taken to show the man as well as the symbol, sometimes pronounced and sometimes subtle. Most of these come from Carrie Kelly, who proves invaluable to him during his triumphant return to crime fighting, and we get to feel a bond with them throughout the film that I don't think has ever been replicated in the animated medium. A kind of parent-child thing made all the more prominent by Carrie's parents literally being neglectful stoners that we haven't ever gotten with Dick Grayson, at least not in these movies, and from those coming up, I'm pretty sure we're still not going to get it. I'll give 2 moments in particular to highlight this point. When Carrie first shows herself to Batman by saving his life against the mutant leader, he doesn't hesitate to lean on her, literally, in getting back to the Batmobile. And though it can be argued that Alfred was right and Bruce was delirious at the time, I think it speaks more to Bruce's loneliness that he so readily brings Carrie into the fold, however he wants to justify it to himself later. Then, before the Joker encounter, the two have to make a harrowing escape from the police, and when Carrie's strap snaps, Bruce catches her, only to have her slip out from her glove. She thinks fast, grasping at his cape, and he pulls her to safety where Carrie, in her likely mix of adrenaline and fear, tightly latches onto Bruce like the child she is, and though Bruce is surprised, he returns the embrace and, in his own way, offers words of comfort to help her calm down.
Good soldier. Good soldier.
But to be clear, Bruce Wayne is clearly very mentally unstable. He has hallucinations, seems to subconsciously consider Batman to be a split personality of sorts, and throughout the movie puts himself in great danger, for the greater good, yes, but once Carrie is trained in Part 2, he still takes the most dangerous parts for himself out of a sense of either obligation or obsession, like when he alone confronts the Joker. However, through that instability, there is a good deal of honor and virtue left in him. When dealing with a man who compromised his morals, allowing a pimp to maim a hooker in the back of his cab in exchange for cash, Bruce just rips up the money and leaves the man to learn from his mistake. He goes out of his way to save a child from the mutants, and though it's more to put himself down than anything, he does relate to Harvey Dent's problem of being unable to overcome his obsession and change for the greater good.
Can change what I am. You and me both.
We see just enough of both sides of Bruce to make him feel like a complete person, and that extends to those around him, but I'll get into that momentarily. In many ways, you could consider this film utilitarian. It shows and tells us exactly what we need to know, no more and no less. Every hit in every fight that actually matters is shown to us and pointed out, if not verbally, then through a reaction shot, such as when Batman makes the leader bleed into his eye, or when he hits a nerve bundle to disable the leader's arm, or when Superman breaks exactly 3 of Batman's ribs. In much the same way, the movie only ever tells us about events that matter to the story it's trying to tell, which is a perfectly fine way of doing things and is undoubtedly the most efficient, but when every civilian scene has someone either discussing, debating, or mentioning Batman, it becomes really weird after a while. I think the only part of the movie that doesn't directly revolve around him is when it follows Gordon during the power outage, where he's just doing his best to rally his immediate neighbors in the same way Batman is doing so citywide. Great minds thought alike in that case. But honestly, I can't even be that mad. I didn't like exactly one small stretch of the movie, and that didn't like is relative to the rest, not that I hated it or anything. And as well, there is one particular moment that irked me. It's a small, ultimately inconsequential scene in part 1. Gordon is getting groceries and a mutant wants to kill him. Gordon pulls his gun in self-defense, the camera cuts to outside as shots are fired, and then smash cut to a news report, and what does she say?
One moment, I've just been handed this. Commissioner James Gordon has been shot and killed. Wait, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Commissioner Gordon has shot and killed a 17-year-old mutant.
Yeah, come on, that's cheap and could have easily been cut and nothing would have mattered. The stretch that I didn't particularly enjoy was the beginning of part 2. Now, I understand that these two parts were released separately and with months between them, but watching it all at once like this really makes you feel how much slower and less interesting that start of the movie exposition is, considering we already know all of this information since we're watching both parts at once. However, once the Joker goes onto the talk show, things pick back up. And of course, the rest of the story, both in part 1 and part 2, is just phenomenal and is portrayed phenomenally well. The colors and shadows are maybe the starkest we've seen, with the exception of some parts of Gotham Knight. The difference is that these uses of shadow ultimately serve to build suspense and visually portray necessary information. I could easily mention the first scene where Batman is out on the prowl, where it holds off for so long in giving us a full shot of him. Either we see him through smoke, in flashes of gunfire, or we only see parts of him like his foot or hand. It's just a masterclass of suspense and provides a fantastic build-up to seeing him in his full glory, from that iconic splash to when he's confronted by the young police officer, and just that whole sequence is done to pretty much perfection. Another really great example of shadow fundamentals is Superman's introduction. Again, he's kept well hidden. At first we hear his voice, we see that Reagan is talking to him, but all we see of him is his cape and the S emblazoned on it. And then when he interrupts one of Bruce's fights at the beginning of part 2, he's once again cloaked in that stark shadow. Once again, his face is completely hidden, visually telling us that this isn't the Superman that we all knew. And it even completes the look with red glowing eyes as he prepares to use his heat vision. And then when we finally do see him, out of costume anyway, he puts a foot up on a rock looking like a classic frontiersman, and then a damn eagle lands on his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. He so sickeningly embodies truth, justice, and the American way that it's hard not to punch the guy in his stupid cowlick. And then Bruce destroys him and his petty arguments. Superman ripped the Green Arrow's arm off to stop him from being a vigilante, and has become a simple tool for the American government, a statement that Clark does not deny, cementing verbally what the visuals already told us. It's really, really great stuff. But it's not just coloring that's done well visually. Believe it or not, we don't actually need the ground to break and the seas to boil when fists collide to let us know that these hits are powerful. Often, it's a simple thing, like making the screen shake and having the proper sound mix that tells us everything. Check this out.
Okay, son. Show me.
The designs are similarly fantastic, expertly adapting Frank Miller's versions into animation and keeping the same general feel of gruffness that he instilled into those classic designs. I could continue on for hours about this movie, breaking down each scene piece by piece, and I honestly might consider doing that if enough people would like to see it, but for now, I want to highlight one more major aspect before obviously going into my usual brief list of quirks that I just want to mention but don't have a lot to say about, and then ending things off. One of the most infuriating things about Superman vs. the Elite was that it portrayed the civilians as brain-dead idiots that flip-flop their allegiances at the drop of a hat, and are also portrayed as one unit, that if one small group of people buys the Elite's crap, then the whole world must too. Dark Knight Returns takes about the opposite approach, and I think it's really, and unfortunately, exceptional in showing many different sides to many different issues. Of note here, however, is that every individual character, however minor, is shown to have a will of their own, even the mutants. Mention is made that not all of them joined in Batman's crusade after the defeat of their leader. They splintered, following their own paths. You have these two dopey mutants who, while comic relief, also serve this function. Several debates are shown between Lana Lang and others over the Batman's return. You have Carrie's friend who worries about her after she takes a weird night job. You have the mental workers who discuss the Joker. You have that one guy who's completely not on board with following the orders of the Batman during the power outage. In storytelling terms, these people are only there to provide the illusion of a lived-in world, and half of them don't have names. The writers likely don't know and don't care about Carrie's friend as a person, yet they did give her some bits of characterization and rapport with Carrie, and their conversations aren't simply there to react to whatever's going on in the moment, or more accurately to weigh in on the issue of the day. When her friend asks if Carrie will be at the fair, it, yes, sets up that fair for the audience, but it also feels like something this girl would say. Are you gonna go to the fair, Carrie? It's natural. In almost all cases, that's the key term. Natural. And my sentiment earlier about the illusion of it all isn't meant to be derogatory because that illusion works. This world feels real, at least over the course of the 2.5 hours you'll be engrossed in it. But I think what really cements this movie as a favorite of mine, top 10 movies ever probably, is just how hopeful it is. Yes, this movie is extremely hopeful. Despite all of the violence, all of the killing, the horrific things that people like the mutant leader and the Joker do, in the end, this property views humanity as ultimately good. Though corrupted and led in entirely the wrong direction, there is value to be found in the mutants' useful propensity to action. Despite that their initial reaction is to loot and plunder during the outage, with direction, the people are who keep Gotham from falling apart, more than any one man. I like that. I like films that view humanity in a positive light rather than just as sheep to be herded or as tools to be used. And in the end, Batman's solution to his one-man war on crime, never ending, is to make an army to be trained just as he was that can protect so many more people than he would ever personally be able to. And of course, there are other things that I could mention as well. It's very clear where Frank Miller's political leanings were from the caricature that is this film's idea of Ronald Reagan.
Turn our tails and run. But we've got to protect our stand up for freedom and the good people of Corto Maltese.
As well, there are several characters that aren't fleshed out and are so obviously straw men representing a very specific, very fringe viewpoint, like the mutant leader who has exactly one mode, and the main psychiatrist that loves to make the argument that Batman is the oppressor and all of the murderous psychopaths he's putting away are the real victims. The logic-defying abilities of Carrie Kelly are also head-scratchers. In part 1, she's fine, but in part 2, she's suddenly leaping like 12 feet in the air as she climbs a roller coaster frame, and is doing all of this expert acrobatic shit with only 3 months of training, which is kind of weird. In general, part 2 seems to throw some of the logic out of the window, which is kind of a shame in my book. Many more scenes occur of Batman and/or Carrie running directly away from a hail of gunfire with no evasive tactics and coming out fine on the other end, which makes the police or anyone else that's shooting at them seem rather incompetent. Then there are the flying dolls, that Joker can take 3 stab wounds, one in his eye by the way, with no physical repercussions, and Batman being able to fight Superman. These things all just barely make sense in the context of the movie since it is more of a hyper-reality than an accurate depiction of it. And to quickly discuss Batman vs. Superman, the scene, not the shitty movie, I think that the scene itself is very good, and it's well set up that Superman is still weak from the nuke, and that Batman has like 15 different plans to deal with him. He didn't just go straight for the kryptonite as in that other property. This is just about the only circumstance that I would accept the battle going this way, especially considering Superman's propensity to hold back against Bruce because he obviously wouldn't want to kill him. That being said, I think this scene, or rather the comic equivalent, helped inspire that tiresome mindset of if Batman has prep time, he can beat anyone, which is just flatly untrue. Like Doomsday or some of the powerful gods like Trigon and Darkseid, he can't beat them. Batman may be able to outsmart someone like Darkseid in very select circumstances, but beat him? Nuh-uh, not happening in any universe that makes sense. I just personally take issue with that mindset because it feeds into the equally tiresome worship of the Batman character that I also hate, and I don't like the implications of this otherwise great sequence. For now, I am so done with Batman. I am Batmaned out. As far as I'm concerned, this, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight, and the DCAU are the only Batman stories you'll ever need. I'm aware that this doesn't cover nearly all of his iconic stories, but frankly, I don't care. At a certain point, Batman needs to go away. But thankfully, he did not go away before this movie could be made. The visuals, the sound mixing, the pacing, the atmosphere, the voice acting, all of these serve to elevate this film to absolute greatness. I could say so much more. I could go on for hours, but I won't. The Dark Knight Returns is an absolute delight, and serves as the benchmark for these movies. All of them are being compared to this one, and not a single one has lived up to it yet. Seek this one out. You won't be disappointed.